Hey everyone, it's Mark Hayward from the Absolute Business Mindset podcast and YouTube channel. Today we have Kevin Whelan, who is the founder of Wealth Builders, which is a wealth creation community where he's able to help people become financially free. But today we are talking about wealth and families, which is a really interesting thing that he's starting to develop courses and books and really getting to the bottom of understanding what it's like for children and how we can elevate them to have greater understanding when it comes to wealth. So if you're enjoying this content, please do give it a thumbs up. Please do give it hit a subscribe button and hit the bell icon, and you get all my videos coming up. Please do leave in any comments that you have about the podcast. It'd be great to hear your thoughts, and if there's anyone else that you would like me to have on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and over to the podcast. Today we have Kevin Whelan, who is the founder of Wealth Builders. Hello, Kevin. How are you today?
Good to see you again, Mark, and lovely to bump into you in London just recently.
It was very serendipitous that we met at a property networking event a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, Kevin, you've got to come back on my podcast. I'm a great admirer of what you've done with Wealth Builders and what you're doing in all aspects of wealth creation. I'm a big fan. But today we're going to start around the area of a new program which you're running, which is about financial literacy and sort of financial management for families. So first of all, Kevin, why don't you tell me a little bit at the start about what the program is and what it contains?
Well, it's a program in the making. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying. So it's great. I mean, you talk about serendipity. It's great to be able to see, what your audience and what you think about that. And financial literacy is a pretty boring thing because there's no financial measure of literacy. Like you could go and get a test to see if you would qualify for Mensa. There's no financial literacy, but the real test would be, if you imagine you've got an older child and they're just about to fly off to university, and you just, are you worried about crumbs? Did they get the lessons? Did they miss out in school on not really understanding what the whole kind of money responsibility is? Are they going to succumb and fall prey to the plan that somebody else for them, whether it's the plan of the bank or the plan of Mark Zuckerberg or somebody else's plan that is really trying to do what business owners do, which is to try and win customers at a very early age so that our children become cannon fodder for other people's businesses. And I think all too often now we're seeing younger kids. And of course, we're talking about the spectrum here from what I call the tinies, which is the sort of, up to about 8, and then the indies, which is, the kids finding their own feet, and the flyers, those about to fly and fly the nest. You want to give all of them a different level of knowledge and information, almost the guidance you never had, that your parents never gave you and the school never could. This is all going to be encapsulated in a program we're calling Wealth Builders for Families, how to be a fantastic money role model for your children of all ages. And I'm excited about it because we need a revolution about this in this country, but nobody is doing it. So we're going to do it.
Fantastic. Why don't you think there's any? Now, I understand that the system, the education system, has been built around people getting educated and getting a job rather than starting a business. We can come on to that in a minute. But why do you think there is no financial or money education at schools, even teenage years or something like that? When I was, this is 20 plus years ago, but when I was in school, you had to do a business class, and you also had to do a sort of social, sort of looking at the society and culture within the UK. But nothing specifically about how to manage your money, how to look after your money, how to save, how to have good debt versus bad debt. Why do you think none of that is in our education system?
I think every educational system is built in its own model. So essentially, when the educational system is created by educators and academics. And they're the very people who've got the safest pensions of all, and the very people who know the least about creativity around finances and around entrepreneurship and around business and about wealth creation. And when you couple academia with a lack of money in terms of the social government willingness to change a curriculum, because if you change a curriculum, you've now got to teach the teachers. And I think the teachers, with the greatest respect to them, they've got a huge role and a huge responsibility to do that. I think the responsibility to be the best influencer of our children when it comes to money, because they're sponges, from that very early tiny age, they're watching us, whether we're giving signs of scarcity or abundance, whether we're always fretting over money or whether we're comfortable around that. All of those things they're picking up. But I think if we can be sensitive ourselves as parents and understand that the key difference maker is us, it can't be schools, So, and I think what we're trying to do is show how you can be a role model in terms of what you say, what you share, the games you play, particularly around meal times, because we're eating anyway, so there's leverage, and there's some fun things that people are doing with that, and some fantastic lessons I've learned along the way with my own children. I've got 3 grown-up children now, and I'm not saying I was the perfect teacher. Probably wasn't, but it's part of the reason, I suppose, now is my grown-ups are getting into the world of work, and I realized I didn't share with them how that company car worked. I didn't share with them emergency tax and what happens, and they're kind of puzzled, and I think, oh right, I didn't actually share that lesson. And so now I'm kind of rewriting the whole process as if I was a parent again of a 6-year-old right up to a 26-year-old. And what would be those things we could do that would be specific to them? So you can't teach a 6-year-old how taxes work and why they should think about joining a company pension scheme, for example. But you can teach a 6-year-old the value of giving, of sharing, of spending, of deferred gratification. There's things you can do with children of all ages that just start to build those little building blocks, brick by brick by brick. And that's what we're going to do. And it's not just me saying, hey, I'm a guru and I'm the person who's done this well. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the principles of wealth building are so well established now, we can distill those down into lessons for any parent to be able to share. And therein, of course, Mark, lies a big problem, that when we looked at this and thought, should we take this knowledge, this information, this education to schools, or should we take it to the parents? Long and hard. And the reason we took it to the parents, or we're taking it to the parents, is because in order to be a great teacher, you need to learn more. And I think part of the problem is the parents themselves often don't know enough because they didn't have role models. When I asked my dad about how much he earned when I was a kid, I got a clip round the ear roll. There was no discussion of money. It was just, what did you absorb? And I remember absorbing negativity around that and not getting any lessons at all. And I think it's time to almost look back and say, what were the lessons you wished you'd had? And we can all put those lessons in place. And by building a huge community of enlightened parents, which is what we're intending to do, I intend to share the best case studies, the best examples of things you wouldn't even dream you would do as a parent, but another parent's done, you go, that's a great idea. I'm going to bring that into my family. And the other thing we'll be doing is creating something called a family charter, Mark, which is, almost a set of values. So pardon me, when people join Wealth Builders as a program, we've got a set of values, and we call it the New Declaration of Independence. And some of those values, like the willingness to be open-minded, the willingness to share knowledge that you've learned, the willingness to take accountability and responsibility, things like that. But for example, if you imagine you were writing a charter that says, in the Haywood family, we are careful with money. In the Haywood family, we look after the planet. In the Haywood family, we are kind and helpful. And you start to, and those things overlap with money, because if you give children money and you create a jar system for that, and then you get a little bit more complicated with bank accounts and a little bit more complicated with accounts when you were grown up. But the same principles apply, that if you're using money to spend it, to save it, and to share it, they're the fundamental principles in there.
Right, I'm going to be incredibly selfish here. I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. So
Pardon me, put a frog in the throat there.
That's all right. So you talked about the three stages, sort of young children, teenagers, and sort of older when they're flying the nest. Let's just hone in on younger children.
Okay.
So how can I be a positive role model for my children? I'll give you a window into we explain to our children that you have to be careful with money, not in a negative outlook, but just like because as a child, it's we just bought them a Nintendo Switch, and now every week it's like, oh, we want a new game, we want a new game, we want a new game. And we're very deliberate on times where we are buying them and when they have to, if it's in between birthdays or whatever it is, to sort of say that it's not just something that we just keep on paying out every week or every couple of days. And that's us trying to instill on our children that you're careful with money. You don't just throw it around if you can afford it or can't afford it. It's not a matter just to throw money around. What are you doing in your program or the program that you're developing at the moment, which would be good insight for sort of parents with young children?
Okay. I mean, that's a huge question, all right? But let me give you 2 or 3 ideas. The first one is, kids of that age are not really going to understand the principle of debt and whether you're spending more than you're earning, and the sorts of issues that sometimes when you don't have that financial responsibility, you can fall foul of. But what they can do is they can appreciate that money is in their life somewhere. You mentioned birthdays, for example. There's this huge issue that's a big debate issue. We've got some strong views on that. Now, by the way, the views that we share are not necessarily the views that everybody should have, right? Because we as parents and we as families can choose our own path. But we just set some ideas out to say, well, what do you think about that? Well, choose your own, but try and make that work. So, for example, you might say, okay, when you get money, do you give pocket money, for example? You don't have to tell me the answer, but let's say people will debate that. We would say, definitely do pocket money, right? And then and create responsibility for the pocket money.
Right.
There's a brilliant book in Australia called Barefoot for Families. He's got a great idea. A guy called I think it's Stuart Pape, I think his name is.
Okay.
But anyway, and his thoughts, which echo mine, certainly on the jars, that you get the money, but instead of just giving them money in terms of you're going to spend it for them, you want to get young children who are increasingly going to be distanced from the feel and touch of money. They're not doing that at all because they see cards, they see swipes, they see taps. So if you can turn that into money, and you can do that, you've got to take that responsibility to want to do that. But if you turn that into money, you can make the money and create 3 little jam jars. Okay, so you can get the kids to, get the jam jars, to clean them, to put a little label on them, whatever you want to call it, any version of, this is money that we want you to spend and enjoy, right? So think about, that's the money you're going to use to do that. You're going to do that. It's your responsibility to do that. This is money we want you to save for something you'll want on another day, or if something breaks, because things will break. And this is a smaller amount of money we want you to share. Okay, then you got then the ability through the tactile nature of touching money,
Yeah.
and touching jars, and thinking, not in a big way, very, very small ways, how they can then put that money. And in addition to that is the Australian guy who does a great job of describing how he does that at meal times. Once a week when it's payday.
Right.
Right. And on the payday, at the end of the meal, and it's all around meal times, the money goes in the jar. And then the lid gets put and the jars get put away. Right. So the kids can't be tempted to nick it. The kids can't, but little things like that. There's a great children's author who written a book called, I think it's called Grandfather's Fairy Tales, or I'll get you the link to it anyway.
Yeah.
And Grandpa's Fortune Fairy Tales, I think it is. And it's just little stories which weave money into bedtime stories. And then you've got the idea of you say to a child, is there anything you're not playing with anymore? Right? And then you can take that and you encourage them to give that to a charity shop.
Right.
So they can see that somebody else is going to get that, and that they're feeling that they're giving, that they're sharing. You can give them easy responsibilities, like, when I remember at school, I don't remember what it was for you, but at school we used ink pens. And I remember at one time I was in school, I was an ink monitor.
Okay. Right.
And an ink monitor was the person who made sure that all the kids, their ink wells were topped up so they could dip their fountain pens in. And we had milk monitors and also.
Yeah.
Right. So in an environment today where the world is very concerned about power, heat, light, and all that, you could easily give a 6-year-old the responsibility to be the light monitor in the house. So your job, Freddie, is to make sure that any room that's empty, the light's turned off. Right. And just watch the kids have fun with it.
Yeah.
And when you come down for your payday dinner, you can say, right, 30 seconds, go around the house, make sure all the lights are off, go. So you can do tiny, tiny things for the little teeny tinies to get them to feel responsibility, to get them to understand that this is how we do things in our household. Is that a few ideas?
No, they're really definitely giving me some good ideas. It's funny you say about the light. We've got one child at 8 who just walks around and literally goes into every room, turns the light on, and then walks out. And my youngest is the complete opposite. She's somewhere along the education system that she's had so far, which is not a lot, 2 years in sort of formal school. She's got into her head. She was reading a book about saving energy, and now she walks around and she turns the lights off. It's a very funny, like that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Something in her brain has it's triggered that you shouldn't waste electricity. You shouldn't waste for the planet. We need to turn these lights off. It's I think it's a really good idea.
I mean, the thing, most of those things I just talked about there had really not a lot to do with money, and it's about responsibility.
Yeah.
You get more into money later because the interaction with money changes fundamentally when it moves from the tactile nature of money to cards, and different types of cards, and different children of different ages can work as well, and from certain ages they can work. Even from a very early age, they've got a full income tax allowance that they can use if they're an actor, or if they're a dancer, or if they're a musician, and then later on, you want to encourage the idea that everybody should, at some point, do some meaningful work, right? And get a job so that they feel the experience of and the nature of what working actually means, including all the negativity that's around work, because most people don't enjoy their work, and you want your kids to, I try and use the analogy of playing on a team. That you know, kids are going to get exposure of all ages to teams, whether they like a football team in their 20s to whether they play for a small team when they're younger. And the idea of always adding value and playing full out for your team members is an important part of that cultural lesson, because when you take on people, or when you look at people in terms of jobs, if you can get them to imagine that they're just playing full on to get the best possible transfer fee to the next team, and that every team they play for is temporary, but their job is to get a push from the previous person who's saying this person's great. You know, we talked earlier on separately about things like testimonials and things in business, and you want every child to get a great glowing testimonial, and not be succumbed into the you know, when a kid goes into work. I worked in a store, you know, worked in BHS, actually it was, you know.
Oh wow, yeah.
Gone out of business now, when I was about 14, and on a Thursday night and a Saturday, and got a paycheck, you know, and that's a cause for celebration. So now we would want the family to get round at a meal time and have a conversation about, well, what does the pay mean? What does the deductions mean? What do these things mean? So they get used to the idea that there's another jar in their life that's going to be called tax, right? Which is part of the share jar when they're tiny, but it's part of a much bigger jar that they have to understand when they get a bit older, and that they're sharing with society. And that you look around, you know, you drive on a road, well, somebody has to pay for those things. So you want them to feel responsibility, not entitlement. Because, you know, in the end, when all of this is done, you know, and we go all the way to the end, and I imagine my end, right? And I want to leave a fantastic legacy. And to me, the legacy is what you leave within them, not the amount of money you leave them. And that all comes from just doing the best you can, but now being more purposeful than I was when I started. So I'm almost going back to my 6-year-olds and going, right, what would we do for them? What would we go? You know, I'm trying to create names. It'd be lovely if some of your audience would even give me kind of names for my groups. You know, so you mentioned your 6 or 8-year-olds. I call those, in my starting thing as I start to write chapters, the tinies. Yeah. And then I've got the explorers, you know, the ones who are just working out who they are. They're at school, but maybe they're fitting in, maybe they're not. You know, they're just trying to work out how they're dressed. They're, you know, explorers. Then the indies, you know, you stop telling me what to do. You know, I want to be independent. They got that fear, you know, that sort of fierce decision. They want to be. They're not quite adults yet, but they want to be. And then the flyers, the ones who are going to be leaving, and you want to make sure that you're leaving them feeling safe and that they've got this covered. They haven't got it in a place where you go, oh no, you know, they're going to go into student debt. They're going to get a credit card. They're going to not realize for the first time the money on the card isn't their money, it's somebody else's money, and you've got to bring that lesson in early in order for all that to happen. So lots and lots of things across the ages there.
So we can talk about the older ages, but one of the things you said earlier on, which struck me, was that you spent a long time thinking about this program, whether it was going to be given to parents or to the schools. And you said that you were struggling on. Can you just go into a little bit more detail why you ended up that it's more to do with the parents' responsibility rather than trying to push it into a curriculum and education system?
Yeah, because the curriculum and the educational system, I've already said, is outdated. And if you give children lessons, but you don't build into them a culture of a family, the lessons will be lost along the way. But if you're reinforcing those lessons and you're sensitive to yourself, to how you want your family to be, how you want them to be as individuals, how you want them to be well-rounded, then you've got that responsibility anyway. And of course, the byproduct of that is the parents themselves become financially smarter because they have to be. And by the way, you can involve your kids in these things. You know, we just talked about power. So if you wanted to be in a position where you said, right, as part of a responsibility for, let's say, an indie, is right, can you now go and research all the insurance for our pet Alsatian? They can do that like that, and you can give them that responsibility. So you can start to involve them. And also, if you're doing things like a lot of our wealth builder clients will be building wealth using other assets. And you and I have spoken much about property in the past, but there's property, there's business, there's intellectual property through books and materials, and also through joint ventures and collaborations. And part of the big challenge that I have with the school system, it encourages and almost punishes collaboration. It's almost like you've got to do the work yourself, and to do the work with anybody else is cheating. You remember the picture of the arm over the homework. You're not copying my homework. I just think it's much better if the parents do it, because they create family values and a family charter that lasts way beyond the current generation into the next generation. And I think that's more powerful than a few lessons distributed here or there, and maybe not done at a national level. I think it's just much more powerful, enjoyable to bring up responsible children, not assume the school's going to take care of it. You can delegate some things in life, but you can't delegate this.
Yeah, I think so. And so just a window into my upbringing. Both my mum and my father were workers. They worked really, really hard. And when I came out of university, the natural thing was that I worked. There wasn't a lot of encouragement to start my own business, to become an entrepreneur, a business owner. For me at home, it wasn't until I was much older that I started to become fascinated by the creativity, the innovation, and running products and services. Why do you think, and I suppose we have covered this a little bit, but why do you think that schools and maybe some parents are obsessed with people having the career? So the sort of idea I'm sort of thinking is, oh, you become a doctor or a lawyer and you work for a big firm and that's success. Why do you think there's such little encouragement about entrepreneurship in schools?
Yeah, it's a good question. Wow, I mean that's a big issue, not just for schools but for parents, because if you have to look at history, because history tells you your upbringing, and your upbringing is largely a reflection of the upbringing you give to the next generation. So if my parents were workers too, and so therefore the upbringing is almost always going to be a reflection of the one that you had, and my grandparents were workers. So you don't really get a chance to discover the creativity, because the creativity is not part of the issue. I mean, there's just a wonderful TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson. It's probably one of the most listened to TED talks of all time, which is talking about why the whole school system is educating the creativity out of our kids. And to be an entrepreneur demands creativity. To be a wealthy person demands creativity, because it becomes about resourcefulness, and resourcefulness comes from within. And that has to be, but with me, it was by accident, so I think you might even know my story. My father was a North Sea oil rig worker, and he died on a North Sea oil rig when he was 46. And so he tragically died early. And, I might add, unfortunately, didn't learn some lessons himself. So didn't have a will, didn't have a life cover to pay off the mortgage, didn't leave any instructions as to what should happen in the event. We all know we're moving towards a date where we'll eventually pass. So all of those things which will be covered in the families, including in case of emergency folder and a file, a fireproof, waterproof, transferable file. You've heard of the recent earthquakes in Turkey and so on. You need to be able to move all your materials. So we're creating those to allow people to give all of their assets and all their liabilities and all their legal documents in a safe, portable place that they can access should the worst happen. But anyway, going back to your question, the educational system is predicated on a job, and the teaching system, as almost all the teachers, until they get fed up, but most teachers, most doctors, and so on, are in final salary pension schemes.
Yeah.
Which means that they're rewarded for longevity.
Mm.
And so therefore it's easy to create that. Now, I'm not against the idea of careers, because I mentioned earlier on about value and about teams. When my father died, and I realized that if I died at the same age as him, there's no way I could save enough money in a job to leave a great legacy and leave my family independent. So I decided to become an entrepreneur. It was a conscious, deliberate decision, forced by the thought of the potential of an early death. Now, that catalyst I wouldn't want on anybody, but the other thing for me was I never realized how dreadfully employable I was, or unemployable. Yeah, and even now I cannot bear to be told what to do for the sake of this is how we do it.
Mm.
You know, I'm a challenging person, and I challenge everything that I see when it makes sense. And that meant for me, I found my path, but I wasn't educated into that path. There's nobody at my school or university said, "Hey, you're a bit rebellious. You know, you might want to go into business because that creativity and that approach might work better." So I discovered that path for myself, and I think for most people, the idea of working in a job first is a good thing, because it gets you the experience of what working is. If you can teach that to your kids early, that they become a team player, they can learn to spot the people who aren't playing in the team, and the moaners and the groaners and all of those things, but not be part of that, be part of the value adder, and then see that their role is to learn to then go play on another team. And
Right.
one day you might be the team owner.
Right.
And that's
Right.
when you make the change. And I think that's better that way, because there's less risk involved.
Mm.
Because you can get all the lessons, you can get all the learnings, you can get all the understanding of the support and the environment of being in work. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And even now in Wealth Builders, for example, my own employees, I teach them the same lessons we teach everybody else. It's virtually impossible to become wealthy by being an employee. And that's a sad story to tell to my own employees, which is why I give them free time every month to explore their own wealth. You know, and we give them free access to all of our information. We want them to be wealthy, but whether they choose to exercise that is a matter for them. And it's the same for everybody. You can give people the choice, but not everybody's fit to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody's fit to be an employee. So you just have to choose the right path. And all of my three kids have grown up to do something completely different. One is absolutely stonewall an employee, no doubt about it. And he's in law training to be a lawyer and wants to be a lawyer. But I don't think he'd run his business. I think he's much more likely to want to be in a firm because he likes, that stability. My other son is much more rebellious, and I think in the end will end up, being in business. And my daughter is more of an employee mindset, but would like to build wealth on the side through property and other things. So you can do both today.
Yeah.
So you can have a career but build wealth in addition to that, and that's kind of what Wealth Builders does. It helps people become independent of the need to work. And whether you choose to do the work you do because you love it, or you just enjoy it, or it's a bit like, I think we were chatting earlier on about a teacher, a friend you knew, who kind of retired from teaching and then become a photographer. Well, clearly he must have had a love of photography.
Yeah.
But now spending that might be the very life that they want. So not necessarily doing it for the money, but doing it because it fulfills something else. And I think what wealth gives you is the freedom of that choice. And what I want to do is make sure that that freedom of choice extends downwards to the children from an early age, because we know the average age of the first-time buyer is getting later and later and later and later. It's now in the late mid-30s now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time between 5 and 35 to be an influencer of your children, and I'm just hoping that the idea really resonates with people, that some people want to be case studies. They want to showcase what they're doing with their own children. I've got lots of families now sharing stories with me in anticipation of that, including people who love property, so they take their children round the properties and they talk about the properties, and and see what their reaction is, and see what their own views and how they express themselves when they see what mummy and daddy are doing to build a portfolio of property. So I think it's just great to see parents now embracing this. Obviously we're doing it, but haven't formalized it in a program yet, but we will be doing that this year in 2023, and on the back of a book that will be produced, and still writing that at the moment. So I'm kind of building things in the book and building things in the program as I go, but always up for anybody out there who's listening who would love to collaborate on it. It's got some ideas. They're a great case study. It'd be lovely to see what you do, because as kids are going to get older, right? So whatever lessons you learn, let's say you buy the book and you read something and it relates to being a light monitor, or what you do in around the dinner table. I remember distinctly, this was a funny one. I have to tell you this story. It's definitely going in the book. I believe there's something to be said about meal times being the center of when money issues are being raised. By the way, I want to caveat all of this conversation about kids and money. The purpose of what we're doing is not to have people obsessed about money. It's not to have people motivated and driven by money. It's just to be aware of money as a part of life.
Yeah.
And that being responsible with it is really, really important. Now, that being said, we've had experiences, actually something else I'll tell you about with Alexa in a moment, because you've got all modern technology now. But I remember we were having a discussion about something, it may not have been specifically about money, in my family, and I used to have a rule, right? And here's my rule: no phones on the table.
Okay.
Right? No phones on the table. And if you ever go to restaurants these days, and it just never fails to amaze me why people will go to a restaurant and be looking at their phone.
Yeah, I know.
Enjoy the food, enjoy the company. Anyway,
yeah.
Enough of that. Anyway, no phones on the table, right? That was my rule. No phones on the table. And then I see my daughter, Holly, with hands under the table, right? And I can see she's concentrating. And I'm going, Holly, what are you doing? She says, I'm texting. I said, no phones at the table. No. She said, no, Dad, you said no phones on the table. I'm under, and she's texting. And, they've got this ability now with their, these opposable thumbs to be able to text anything they want without even looking at their keyboard. And it's like, right, okay, I've changed the rule. It's now the dining area, right, is a no phone zone, right? You can't have a phone anywhere near it. Leave your phone somewhere else. And that's the rule that we picked up after that. But the interesting Alexa story is through one of our clients who use things like premium bonds, because premium bonds for grandparents, they're a fun thing. Kids can have premium bonds and so on, and then every month there's a prize draw, and you can sit around Alexa and see who's won. And it's almost like a game. You can see, well, Dad won £25 and Mum won £50, and poor old Freddie earned nothing. So it's almost, you can have fun with some of these things as well. So that's all part of it, really, is making money fun, not making money a pain in the arse, and certainly nothing to be obsessed about.
And I want to focus in a minute on those teenage years, the sort of, but I want to just ask you a question about the older ones, the people who are flying the nest, people who are going to university. What's your view on the business management business courses that we get, because a lot of people that I've interviewed on my podcasts have started, they tend to, this is a wild generalization, there's lots of different creeds and kinds that have been on my podcast, but often people that want to talk about business either have done a business course of some description at university, or they've done an MBA at a later stage, or they've just rejected, no, the other one is they go into sales very quickly.
Mhm.
Coming back to the business side, what's your view on doing a business course for the sake of a business course rather than having a massive passion about running businesses or starting businesses?
That's an interesting question. I mean, look, education is the precursor to all wealth building. You can't build wealth unless you know more. Now, where you get that knowledge from, obviously, we talked about trying to impart that through the whole family. Whether you should buy a course or not, I think there's a danger. So I'm neither for or against it, because there's a danger that whenever courses are made available, then they become products. And when products become created, they become sold. And sometimes the selling of a product can overtake the need and the timing. And we've seen so many people who become course junkies over the years in all sorts of wealth activities, in business and property and so on. And it can be almost an excuse for not doing something. So I need to learn everything before I do something. And I'm not a fan of that. But if you decide you want to get into something that's a passion or something you really want to develop, like as I mentioned, I got into finance and I got that through a job. You know, my early experience was you get a job and then they'll teach you. And then from that, moved on to create a mortgage broking business, an IFA business, wealth builder business, and so on. So my businesses have all been around finance because I did an economics degree, so that helped. So I kind of built on some of the foundations I already had from university, not necessarily from home. Uh, and that helped me so I can choose what I want to do. But if you're choosing well and recognizing you need a return on the investment, so if you're spending, you know, most people are spending money for university courses these days, right? 9,000 a year, so you can be in debt very quickly. Of course, you know, there'll be a view in the book about student debt and whether you should pay it off or whether you shouldn't pay it off. All of that's going to be covered in the book, and I've got some strong views on that. But in the end, if you're going to get a return from the investment in the knowledge and you're pretty confident you can bank on that return, then I would encourage it every time.
It's interesting you say about the course junkies. I've had a couple of training with sort of tactical training on how to do things, and I'm actually doing something at the moment now which is a bit more theoretical. It's the finance, the economics of real estate with LSE. I've just doing a course with them at the moment, and I just think I need a little bit more theoretical knowledge. I've got a lot of tactical knowledge on property, and I understand the different strategies, but I felt I needed some extra. But what I do find, and this worries me, and I think your whole idea of a course being a product that you're providing people really worries me, because I see some people spending a lot of money on lots of courses doing it at the same time, and then expecting the world to open up for them because they've done 3 different courses on different strategies within property. Well, in actual fact, what you've got is you've got 3 different things that you want. You're being pulled in different directions. My view is you do one, get good at it, systemize it, process it, outsource it, and then maybe try another one. It does worry me, the sort of education system for adults.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I fully sympathize with your view as well. Because in the end, you know, wealth is about doing, not about theorizing. So we've got a view with wealth building, which is focus. This is a reflection of yours really. Focus your way to economic or financial security. That means you can afford to give up the day job.
Right.
Diversify your way to independence and leaving a legacy, because that diversification comes from knowing when you can afford to give up the day job, because most people, that's the wrestle. You've then got the time that you were doing in the day job that is now being paid for by the ownership of assets that you have.
Yeah.
We covered in the previous podcast, I think, the 7 and only 7 assets you can use to build wealth. And I'll certainly make the book available on the 7 pillars of wealth to your listenership, because we want people to understand that wealth comes from assets. It doesn't come from work, but you have to work at the assets. And that's another lesson you can build into kids' minds very easily. You could talk about, and there's another lesson maybe for your little ones here, the value in waiting. So, for example, and definitely some of the articles will be writing is we create this as an ongoing thing. As your kids get older, you're learning new lessons all the way, so that it's not a product. You don't just buy the book and go, right, now I know how to look after my kids, because times change, things change, rules change. But the idea of that, if you think about wealth in one way, it's a bit like farming, isn't it? You're planting seeds, and then you have to wait a period of time and do some work excuse me, in order for the seeds to become fruit.
Yes.
And then you harvest the fruit, and then you go again. Now you can do that with children. You can say, we take responsibility. You could give a young child the responsibility to nurture something, whether it's a small plant, whether it's an animal, something where they've got to physically get involved to nurture that.
And it's all action. You said earlier on, and I think this is the thing that I just want to extend to my audience, is you can have really good training courses, and they can be formal, they can be informal, they can be really, really helpful, but it's the whole point of action orientated doing, which is what is the game changer from knowing the information and actually doing it and walking the walk and building up your additional experience, knowledge, expertise.
Yeah, and that's a very, very, very valid point when it comes back to your question about why wouldn't you do it in schools? Because in a curriculum, it's going to be a box ticked exercise. They pass a test in citizenship or something, but there's no action based, because the action you have to do every day or every week or every month, you've got to have the consistency of action. And that only happens inside families, because you're bringing them up anyway. And then you could be sensitive to their changing and shape the actions that you want them to take. So I think that's a really key point that you made. Things about the lights, action, right? Fun, running, action. Nurturing a tomato plant or or something in the garden, action. Taking care of a pet, walking the dog, action. You're getting them involved in taking action, because you can't do too much theory with a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old that you can do with an 18 or a 20-year-old. So you have to adapt things to suit the age.
So let's take that up on teenagers. We've covered, and I say you said there was 4 areas, but I'm sort of positioning them as 3, but by all means distinguish between them. But we've talked about younger children, we've talked about the older children, university and flying the nest. So that age you said about doing a job when you were younger, at 16, I tried to do a job at 14 or 15, didn't like what I was doing, and I just went, not doing that. I got to 16, wanted some independence for myself, worked in a Sainsbury's. It wasn't a Sainsbury's, it was something else, but I worked as a cashier because I wanted to generate money for myself to be able to do things that I wanted to do personally. And then and then at university I worked as well through university because I wanted the finance. What for those teenage years, and do distinguish the teenage years if you break them up slightly, but how do we sort of create a positive reaction from teenagers, which are difficult? They're butting against the system, they're butting against rules, they're sometimes pushing against parents. How do we work out those years that can sort of enable, enhance, make better for those, in some way, sometimes quite difficult years? They were for my years anyway.
No, I get that. I'm sorry to take you back.
That's all right.
There's obviously, it stimulates some emotion around that. I think there's a big difference between the kind of the indies, as I call them, the sort of your 15 to 18-year-olds, where you're desperately seeking that independence. And I think the values and the actions that you would want to get across to those are the very actions that will give them more of that. So, what can you do that can create value? So, for example, as you go through family life, and you have things like games, and you have in I think in the previous life we had loads of CDs, before CDs got expunged by Spotify and other
Yeah.
things. My kids would sell those, in some kind of thing. And you could do that. So you can recognize that as things move very quickly, you can give the responsibility to declutter or to remove things that are no longer needed, and give them to an indie, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, and let them put them online. Let them create an income online, which they get to keep. But you've still got the same principles of spending, saving, and sharing in whatever proportion you want to do that. So that you, even though kids are hard work, and yes, they're going to rebel, but that's got to let them do that.
Yeah.
You still want to keep and distill, or instill rather, those values about what you stand for as a family, and that you're giving them head to do that. And whether it's, not buying them a car, it's giving them the sense of, this is what you need to buy a car. Let's talk about that. Go off and do some research and tell me what you see. What kind of, if you wanted a car, what kind of cost would it be? Okay, let's see how much you're saving from, your account. You're not jars anymore. There'll be accounts, but you can see those accounts, and you can share the responsibility of those accounts, and start talking to them about the cost of things like insurance, the cost of other things that they might need. And at the beginning, you're a taxi, right? And in the end, they become a taxi.
Right. Now, this is an interesting point for me, and it's very hard to just. I'm finding this quite hard to work out when that right age group is. So at the moment, my 6 and 8-year-old, they don't really have a concept of
No.
whether something costs £1,
Yeah.
£100, £1,000,000. They like, when something comes up and it's like £1,000, they think that is like the most money ever. And interestingly, you say once, let's just say 17, where they want a car, and they would have to do the research into how much is the insurance, how much is the car you want, is it repayments, is it whatever. When does that distinction, because I'm at the moment very much loosely like running this path until I think it's the right time, and it's not, obviously not the right time at 8 years old, but just to give, as you've done some research and done some talking to people in this, what sort of is that age group when they start getting a realization of how much things actually cost?
It's nowhere near 6 to 8, and it's
No.
probably nowhere near the explorers, which is the 11 to 14-year-olds. They start to get a sense around 13, 14, I think.
Okay.
Because you're going on family holidays, and you can share with them the cost of holidays.
Right.
You can share with them the cost of certain things. And you can, even if you want to, share with them, what mum and dad earn and what the net income is, so they can see that you're not a bottomless pit, and that's why we need to be responsible. So I think all children are different anyway. So there's the curriculum at home is not the same as a curriculum at school. But I think it's going to be at that sort of 14.
Okay.
So you've got a bit.
That's interesting. I've got a little while until that happens. And let's just delve into the irresponsibility and of teenage years versus the grounding responsibility that you're trying to create in your family when it comes to money. How do you straddle those, probably the indies for you, sort of 15 to 18-year-olds that are pushing against the system versus having them grounded on a financial basis?
I think there's an issue here, Mark, that's fundamental. That this is not a recipe to cure kids from being who they're going to be. It's just not. All I'm saying is, parents, you're going to get shed loads of things completely wrong. You know, you can't not do that. Every child's going to react differently. You're going to get things wrong. Just get a few things right when it comes to money.
Right.
That's all you can do.
Nice.
I'm not trying to say this is a panacea for parents.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just bring a little bit of responsibility in all that heat and that light and that rebellion, because that's going to happen anyway.
Mm.
You know, you just put a little bit of grounding in that and go, well, that's fine. They're going to do that. You know, you were probably like that. I was like that. You're going to get that. There's nothing you can do about that. It's. I'm just trying to say, put some things so that in the end, the flyers, when they go, you want to be able to go as they take the car and they go. You want to go. They're going to be all right. Right?
And it's grounding. I actually think
That's
it's grounded. It's making sure that your kids have a solid base to go through their lives with. If you can do that, I think that's the art form. And as you say, lots of kids that react differently to different ways that you treat them and things like that. So there isn't a magic formula that you're trying to create here. But I think what you're trying to do is that throughout their ages, you're building up a certain amount of knowledge which keeps them grounded when they go forward and fly the coop.
You're absolutely right, but I'm going to make one more point, I think, on this, which I think, I'll try not to get too emotional about it, but it is emotional, and it all comes down to memories. Yeah. So if you don't share things, and you demonstrate by the fact you're not sharing a life of scarcity and do this and do that, and you're hiding things, then you won't leave great memories and you won't prepare your children for what's to come. If, however, you've created a family with a charter, we do this, we believe that, we are responsible, we get we always play flat out for the team we're playing on, you've got to create these rules. And then you build the fun around those rules, then and particularly around meal times, which I think is where this should take place. And I'm absolutely fundamentally about that. That if you make meal times and then you start to invite grandparents, and then you've got up generation, down generation, and getting curious about at those meal times, what was your experience, Dad? What was your first job? What, Granddad, what did you do when you got your first job? And how much did you make? Oh, you earned 2 and 6 a week. Well, how much is 2 and 6? And you have conversations, you're creating smiles and creating memories. And I think that's just as important in all of this, because one day we're going to go. And when we go, we want those memories.
Yeah, absolutely. I've lost both my parents and I've lost my brother all in a sort of 6-year period, and my grandfather actually at the same time. And from that point of perspective of memories, I know that, I wasn't the easiest teenager at certain times, but I did have a loving family. And that's something that the older I've got and now have children, is that I want to be able to try and, in my own way, me and my wife's way, not necessarily just the way my parents did it, but I want my kids to feel after the experience, because you get things wrong and you both sides get upset. But if you've got memories that you had a happy childhood, I think that is so important, and that is what we should be striving to achieve. And the last thing I'll say on this is, I say this to friends and family, and sorry about the language, everyone who's listening, you're going to fuck up your kids somehow. You're going to be too supportive and they find you overbearing, or you're too cold and you're distant and you don't react well to see. Every child growing up through their teenage years are going to have an angst against you for some reason, whether it's one end to the other. I think we just have to embrace that as parents and say that is going to happen whatever we do. But I always think at that reflection point, a little bit older, maybe into your 20s or maybe 30s, if you look back and you go, Yeah, that was pretty good. That like my parents did a good job in what they did. I actually
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's the reflection point.
exactly right. And so yeah, we didn't want to try and create a therapy session for each other here, but
That's fine.
there's obviously a bit of emotional stuff in there, and that's good because it makes it real, it makes it
Yeah.
authentic. And the reason why we're not trying to replicate or give advice about how anyone should parent. We're just trying to say these are good lessons that you can bring a little bit of the financial piece of that whole family jigsaw puzzle
Mm, mm,
into play, to play it well,
mm.
and to make the value that you teach last a lifetime.
So we're coming to the end of the podcast. I'm not going to have 6 questions as I usually ask, I guess, because you've already answered them. But just lastly, before we finish up, if people want to find out more about wealth builders or wealth builders for families,
Mhm.
what's the sort of action? Where can people go to if they want to find out more information?
Well, definitely wealthbuilders.co.uk is the website. What we could do, Mark, is create a little landing page at some point to give some free information. If anybody, though, wants to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. If you've got a case study or you just want to say something about what you think about the idea of what we're trying to bring here, then every little bit of feedback helps us just make this better. And once we've written the book and it's out, we'll hopefully come back and talk again. And maybe a little case study from you in there.
I'm happy to share a few for you. Lastly, when do you think the book will be out? When do you think just approximate times for my audience?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And currently, I'm still writing one, which is we didn't get a chance to talk about today, but I'll just drop it in there, which is pensions chaos. The reason why the pension system in the UK doesn't work for anybody but the industry itself, and
Okay.
what you can do about that. And that's a big bugbear for me. So that's being written as we speak. I'm doing work on that. So that'll be finished by end of March. I think end of June, probably I'll finish this one.
Yeah.
I would expect it to be a summer launch.
Fantastic. That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time again. I always find I learn something from you whenever I speak to you. But thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to working with you again.
Great. I really hope you've enjoyed that content. It's a really fascinating interview that I've done there. So please do, if you are enjoying this content, please do give it a like. Please do give a subscribe. It'd be really good to boost the subscriptions. It really makes a difference to the algorithm in YouTube. So thank you for that. If you do hit subscribe, hit the bell icon and you'll get all of the content. You'll get notified when all the content is available. Thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. Thank you.